Tonight, we travel farther back in time than almost any story can take us, before the rise of Greece, before the Roman Empire, before many of the world's greatest civilizations had even begun. Our journey leads us more than 4,000 years into the past, to a world where kings ruled from towering temples, where rivers gave life to entire civilizations, and where stories were carved into clay instead of written on paper. Imagine holding a small broken piece of clay in your hand. At first glance it seems insignificant, just an old fragment buried beneath layers of dust and sand. But imagine that tiny fragment contains part of a story. Not just any story, the oldest great written story humanity has ever discovered. For thousands of years, that story lay hidden beneath the soil of ancient Mesopotamia, forgotten by the world. Empires rose and fell, languages disappeared, cities turned into ruins. Yet somehow, the story survived. In the 19th century, archaeologists exploring the ruins of ancient Iraq uncovered thousands of clay tablets covered with strange, wedge-shaped symbols. Piece by piece, scholars began assembling them, like a giant puzzle scattered across centuries. Slowly, a remarkable tale emerged, a tale of friendship, adventure, loss, mortality, and humanity's endless desire to overcome death. The hero of this ancient epic was a king named Gilgamesh, and despite the thousands of years that separate us from him, his story still feels surprisingly familiar. Because at its heart, it asks questions that every human being eventually faces. Why do we lose the people we love? How should we live knowing that life is temporary? And what kind of legacy do we leave behind? Before we begin tonight's journey, take a moment to like the video, subscribe if you enjoy these bedtime book summaries, and settle comfortably as we explore the oldest surviving story ever written. Our tale begins in the land between two rivers, a place many historians call the cradle of civilization. Long ago, between the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a remarkable civilization flourished. This region became known as Mesopotamia. Its fertile soil supported farms, cities, temples, and trade routes that connected distant peoples. Here, humans developed some of the earliest forms of writing. Here, some of the world's first great cities rose from the earth. One of those cities was Uruk. To its people, Uruk was magnificent. Massive walls surrounded it. Markets overflowed with goods. Priests performed ceremonies in grand temples. Scribes carefully recorded information onto clay tablets. Life was busy, vibrant, and constantly changing. And at the center of it all stood a king whose name would survive for thousands of years: Gilgamesh. Some historians believe he may have been a real ruler around 2700 BCE. Whether entirely historical or partly legendary, his memory grew with every generation. Stories about him spread throughout the ancient world. Merchants carried them, travelers shared them. Storytellers repeated them around fires and in royal courts. Eventually, those stories became an epic unlike any other. But the Gilgamesh we meet at the beginning of this story is not a hero. Not yet. According to legend, Gilgamesh was unlike ordinary men. He was said to be 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. His strength was unmatched. His beauty inspired admiration. His confidence seemed limitless. People described him as towering over others, possessing the power of a wild bull and the appearance of a god. Everything about him suggested greatness. Everything suggested destiny. But power alone does not make a good ruler. In fact, power without wisdom can become dangerous. And that is exactly what happened. Rather than using his gifts to help his people, Gilgamesh became consumed by pride. He believed no one could challenge him, no one could equal him. And because of that belief, he began ruling for himself rather than for the people of Uruk. The city remained magnificent, but beneath its beauty, suffering quietly grew. The people of Uruk lived in fear of their king. Gilgamesh demanded obedience. He exercised his power however he wished. Families suffered. Young men were forced into endless competitions and labor. Citizens whispered their frustrations in private. The king, who should have protected them, had become their burden. Eventually, the people turned toward the heavens. They prayed to the gods. They begged for help. Their cries rose from the streets of Uruk to the divine realm itself, and the gods listened. They knew Gilgamesh possessed extraordinary gifts. Destroying him would solve nothing. Instead, he needed someone capable of changing him, someone who could stand as his equal, someone who could teach him humility. And so, the gods devised a plan. The goddess Aruru gathered clay in her hands. From that clay she shaped a man, a powerful man, a wild man, a man who would become Gilgamesh's equal. His name was Enkidu. Unlike Gilgamesh, Enkidu knew nothing of cities, nothing of kings, nothing of civilization. He lived among the animals. He ran beside gazelles. He drank from rivers. He slept beneath open skies. Nature was his home. The wilderness was his kingdom. His long hair flowed freely. His body was strong and untamed. The animals accepted him as one of their own. For a time, Enkidu lived in harmony with the natural world, but destiny was already moving toward him, and soon everything would change. One day, a trapper noticed something strange. Animals kept escaping his traps. Someone was freeing them. Following the tracks, he discovered Enkidu. Alarmed, he reported what he had seen. Soon, the temple priests learned about the wild man. To bring Enkidu into human society, they sent a temple priestess named Shamhat. Shamhat approached Enkidu not with weapons, but with kindness, patience, and understanding. Over 6 days and 7 nights, she introduced him to human life. When their time together ended, something remarkable had happened. Enkidu had changed. The animals no longer accepted him, yet he had gained something far greater: awareness, knowledge, human consciousness. He learned about cities, he learned about people, and eventually he learned about Gilgamesh. The more he heard, the more determined he became. He would travel to Uruk, and he would confront the king. When Enkidu arrived in Uruk, excitement spread throughout the city. A challenger had appeared, someone powerful enough to oppose the king. Soon, the two giants stood face to face. Neither backed down, neither showed fear. Then they collided. Their wrestling match became legendary. The streets echoed with the sounds of their struggle. Crowds gathered to watch. Dust rose into the air. Again and again, each tested the other's strength, yet neither could claim victory. At last, both recognized something they had never experienced before: an equal. And from that realization came respect. From respect came friendship. The rivalry ended. A brotherhood began, and it would change both men forever. For the first time, Gilgamesh had someone who could truly understand him. and for the first time, Enkidu had a place in human society. Together, they became inseparable. Their friendship transformed them. Gilgamesh grew wiser, Enkidu grew more confident, yet neither wanted an ordinary life. Both longed for greatness, both dreamed of earning everlasting fame. Their opportunities seemed to lie far from Uruk, beyond distant mountains within the sacred cedar forest. There lived a terrible guardian named Humbaba, and the two friends decided they would challenge him. The journey was long and dangerous. The farther they traveled, the more distant civilization became. Dark forests stretched before them. Mountains rose on the horizon. The unknown surrounded them. Even Enkidu, brave as he was, felt uneasy. He knew stories about Humbaba. Everyone did. The monster guarded the sacred cedar trees on behalf of the gods. To challenge him was dangerous, perhaps even foolish, but Gilgamesh refused to turn back. His desire for glory pushed him forward. Eventually, the friends reached the forest, and there, waiting among the towering cedars, stood Humbaba. Humbaba was terrifying. Legends described him with the features of multiple beasts combined into one monstrous form. His presence alone inspired fear. Yet Gilgamesh and Enkidu stood their ground. A fierce battle followed. The forest shook with violence, trees trembled, the air filled with chaos. At last, the monster fell, defeated. Humbaba begged for mercy, but mercy did not come. The friends killed him. Then they cut down the sacred cedar trees he had protected. It seemed like a great victory, but victories sometimes carry hidden costs, and this one would prove devastating. The gods were furious. Humbaba had served a divine purpose. The sacred forest had been entrusted to his care. Now both guardian and forest had been destroyed. A council of gods met to decide punishment. Someone had to pay. The decision was harsh. One of the two friends would die. The choice fell upon Enkidu. Soon afterward, he became ill. Day by day, his strength faded. The mighty warrior who had once run beside wild animals could barely stand. Gilgamesh watched helplessly. For perhaps the first time in his life, strength could solve nothing, and death was approaching. For 12 painful days, Enkidu suffered. At first, he raged against fate. He cursed the circumstances that had led him from the wilderness. But eventually, his anger softened. He realized something important. His journey had brought him friendship, purpose, meaning, and those gifts mattered. Then, at last, Enkidu died. Gilgamesh was devastated. The strongest man in the world could not save his friend. No amount of power could stop death. The reality struck him with terrifying force. If Enkidu could die, then someday he would die too. And from that moment forward, fear entered Gilgamesh's heart. Unable to accept mortality, Gilgamesh abandoned his kingdom. He wandered into distant lands searching for answers. His goal was simple. He wanted to find eternal life. His journey carried him beyond the edges of the known world. He encountered scorpion people who guarded the path of the sun. He traveled through regions few humans had ever seen. Eventually, he crossed the deadly waters of death. At the end of his journey, he found Utnapishtim, the only human granted immortality by the gods. Surely, Gilgamesh thought, this man held the secret. Utnapishtim shared an ancient story, a story of a great flood that once threatened to destroy humanity. Because he had preserved life, the gods rewarded him with immortality. But immortality was not easily earned. To prove himself worthy, Gilgamesh was challenged to remain awake for 6 days and 7 nights. He failed almost immediately. Exhaustion overcame him, yet one final opportunity remained. A special plant growing beneath the sea could restore youth. Gilgamesh dove deep and retrieved it. At last, hope returned. But on his journey home, disaster struck. While he rested, a serpent stole the plant. As the snake shed its skin and renewed itself, Gilgamesh lost his final chance. Everything he had searched for was gone, and for the first time, he truly understood. Death could not be defeated. When Gilgamesh finally returned to Uruk, he saw his city differently. He noticed its walls, its temples, its gardens, its people. The things he once overlooked now seemed precious. He realized that immortality was never about living forever. It was about what remained after we were gone, the friendships we build, the people we help, the cities we create, the stories we leave behind. Gilgamesh became a wiser king, a more thoughtful ruler, and before long he recorded his journey on clay tablets so future generations could learn from his mistakes and discoveries. Thousands of years later, those tablets were found, and because of them, his voice still reaches us today. The Epic of Gilgamesh endures because its questions are our questions, its grief is our grief, its hopes are our hopes. And its lesson remains as powerful now as it was 4,000 years ago. We cannot escape death, but we can choose how we live. We can choose what kind of legacy we leave behind. And perhaps that is the closest thing to immortality any of us will ever know. As our journey through the world's oldest surviving story comes to an end, allow its wisdom to settle gently into your thoughts. Thank you for joining me tonight. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next bedtime book summary.